The Long Ships, Part 1, The Long Voyage, Chapter 9. Continued. King Harold says, Therefore, let Orm and Sigtryg fight here in the cleared hall before my table, with sword and shield, helmet and chain shirt, and let no man assist them, except with the putting on of their armour. If one of them be killed, the matter is decided. But if either of them be no longer able to stand upright, or throw down his sword, or seek shelter beneath the tables, his adversary shall not continue to strike at him, for he shall then be deemed to have lost the fight, and the chain with it. And I and Styrbjorn and Halbjorn, my groom, shall see that the contest is fairly fought. The men hastened to fetch armour for Orm and Sigtryg, and the noise in the hall was very great, as the rival merits of the champions were extolled and challenged. King Harold's men deemed Orm the better fighter of the two, but King Sven's men were loud in Sigtryg's praise, and said that he had slain 9 men in single combat, without sustaining a single wound serious enough to require bandaging. Among those who talked loudest was Dura. He asked Orm whether he was not afraid that the cold of the grave might make him cough. Then he turned to his brother and bade him to be content to have Orm's chain for his share of the compensation, and allow him, Dura, to have Orm's sword. All this while, since they had first interrupted his story, Toke had been sitting in heavy silence, mumbling to himself and drinking. But when he heard Dura's words, life seemed to return into his brain. He plunged his eating knife into the table in front of Dura's place, so that it stood quivering in the wood, and tossed his sword, still in its sheath, beside the knife. Then he leaned forward across the table, so quickly that Dura had no time to draw away, seized him by the ears and the beard on his cheeks, and forced his face downwards towards the weapons, saying, Here you see weapons as good as Orm's, but if you wish to have them, you must win them yourself, and not beg them from another. Dura was a strong man, and he took hold of Toke's wrists, and tried to dislodge his grip, but only succeeded in intensifying the pressure on his ears and beard, so that he groaned and grunted, but could not free himself. I am holding you here in amicable converse, said Toke, because I have no wish to disturb the king's peace in this hall. But you shall not go free till you have promised to fight with me, for Red Jowl likes not to hide her beauty from men's eyes when her sister dances naked. Let me go, snarled Dura, his mouth pressing against the table, that I may waste no time in closing your mouth. That is a promise, said Toke, and as he spoke he released his grip, and blew from between his fingers the wisps of beard that he had dragged from their roots. The whole of Dura's face, apart from his ears, which were scarlet, was white with fury, and at first he seemed to have lost the power of speech. He rose slowly to his feet, and said, This matter shall be settled without delay, and your suggestion is a good one, for by this means my brother and I shall have a Spanish sword apiece. Let us go out and piss together, nor forget to bring our swords with us. That was well spoken, said Toke. You and I can dispense with the formalities of kings. For your acceptance of my suggestion, I shall remain in your debt as long as you live. How long that may be, we shall shortly know. Then they descended the length of the king's table, each on his opposite side, and strode shoulder to shoulder down the aisle between the long tables that faced each other across the hall, and out through one of the doors in the short wall at the bottom. King Sven saw them go, and smiled, for it pleased him to see his men behave arrogantly, because this increased his fame, and the fear in which his name was held. Meanwhile, Orm and Sigtryg had begun to arm themselves for combat, and the part of the floor where they were to fight had been swept, so that they should not slip on the straw or stumble over the bones that had been thrown there for King Harald's dogs to gnaw. The men who had been eating at the top and bottom of the hall now crowded forward to get a better view, squeezing into spaces on the benches and the long tables on both sides of the cleared square, as well as behind King Harald's table and along the wall on the remaining side. King Harald was in high good humour, and could scarcely wait for the fight to begin, and when, on turning on his head, he noticed two of his women peeping eagerly in at one of the doors, he issued a command that all his women and daughters should come and watch the sport, for it would be a hard thing, he said, if they should be denied the pleasure of witnessing such a spectacle. He made room for some of them on his own royal bench, by his side and on his knees, and for others on the bishop's empty seat. The two most beautiful of his daughters, however, managed to find a space on either side of Styrbjorn, and found nothing to complain of in the tightness of the crush that pressed them against him. They giggled coyly when he offered them ale, and drank it with a bold air. For those women who could not find room on the royal bench, another bench was placed behind the table, in such a position that the king and his companions did not impede their view. Halbjorn the groom then commanded a fanfare to be blown, and called for silence. He proclaimed that everyone should keep absolutely still while the fight was in progress, and that no man might shout advice to the contestants or throw anything into the arena. Both the contestants were now ready, and they entered the arena and stood facing each other. When it was seen that Orm held his sword in his left hand, an excited hubbub of discussion broke out, for a fight between one right-handed and one left-handed man provided difficulties for both of them, since it meant that the blows fell on their sword-arm sides, to which their shield offered less protection. It was plain that neither of them was the sort of adversary that a man would choose to find himself pitted against, nor did either man appear to cherish any anxiety regarding the outcome of the contest. Orm was a half a head taller than Sigtryg, and had the longer reach, but Sigtryg was more squarely built, and looked rather the more powerful man of the two. They held their shields well forward across their breasts, and high enough to be able to cover their necks promptly, should the necessity arise, and each kept his eyes fixed on his opponent's sword, so as to be able to anticipate the other's blows. As soon as they came within striking distance of one another, Orm aimed a slash at Sigtryg's legs, but Sigtryg evaded the blow nimbly and replied with a vicious swing that landed with a ringing crash on Orm's helmet. After this opening, both men proceeded more cautiously, parrying each other's blows skillfully with their shields, and King Harald was heard to observe to his women that it was good to see experienced swordsmen such as these at work, instead of the sort who rushed crazily into the fight, leaving themselves open, for this meant that the spectacle would last longer. "It is no easy thing to forecast which of these two is likely to prove the master," he said, "but the red man looks to me to be as safe a swordsman as I have seen for many a month, for all his fear of the cold, and I shall not be surprised if Sven is one kinsman the poorer tonight." King Sven, who, like both the Jarls, was sitting on the edge of the table to get a better view of the fight, smiled contemptuously, and retorted that nobody who knew Sigtryg need have any fears regarding the outcome. "Although my men are not averse to the sport of armed combat," he said, "it is seldom that I lose one of them, except when they fight against one another." As he spoke, Toke re-entered the hall. He was limping badly, and could be heard to be muttering a verse to himself, and as he climbed over the bench to his place, it could be seen that one of his legs was black with blood from his thigh to his knee. How went it with Dura? Asked Sigurd Burson. It took time, replied Toke, but he finished pissing at last. Everybody's eyes were now on the fight, which Sigtrygg seemed eager to bring to a quick conclusion. He was attacking Orm savagely, trying to pierce his defense and concentrating on his legs and face and the fingers of his sword hand. Orm was defending himself ably, but did not appear to be able to achieve anything very positive himself, and it could be seen that he was having trouble with Sigtrygg's shield. This was larger than his own, and was of tough wood, strengthened with leather. Only the center boss was of iron, and Orm had to take care that his sword should not become embedded in the edge of the shield, for if that were to happen, it would give Sigtrygg the chance to snap it or wrench it from his grasp by a twist of his arm. Orm's shield was made entirely of iron, with a sharp spike in its center. Sigtrygg sneeringly asked Orm whether it was warm enough for him. Blood was pouring down Orm's cheek from the first blow on his helmet, and he had besides received a thrust in the leg and a slash across the hand, while Sigtrygg was still unmarked. Orm made no reply, but retreated step by step alongside one of the long tables. Crouching behind his shield, Sigtrygg moved swiftly into the attack, padding forwards and occasionally leaping to one or the other side, while his blows rained ever the more fiercely, so that it seemed to most of the spectators that the end could not now be far distant. Then Orm suddenly sprang at his opponent, and, taking Sigtrygg's blow on his sword, drove his shield against Sigtrygg's with all his strength, so that the spike on his own shield pierced through the leather and into the wood, and remained embedded there. He forced the shields downwards so hard that the handles of both of them snapped, whereupon the two men both took a step backwards, freed their swords, and, leaping high into the air, slashed at each other in the same instant. Sigtrygg's blow struck Orm in the side, piercing his chain shirt and causing a deep wound, but Orm's sword buried itself in Sigtrygg's throat, and a great shout filled the hall as the bearded head flew from its shoulders, bounced on the edge of the table, and fell with a splash into the butt of ale that stood at its foot. Orm staggered and supported himself against the table. He wiped his sword across his knee, replaced it in its sheath, and gazed down at the headless body lying at his feet. "Now you know," he said, "whose chain it is."